A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today at the ISA's seminar titled Pakistan-Afghanistan Relations, Complicated History, Uncertain Futures. The seminar will address the complex history of Pakistan-Afghanistan relations that are critical to the two countries' security, economic future, and political stability. Today, we are delighted to have with us Professor Tawqir Hussain, Visiting Research Fellow, Institute of South Asian Studies, NUS, and former Senior Diplomat of Pakistan. Today's session will be chaired by Associate Professor Iqbal Singh Sevia, Director, Institute of South Asian Studies, NUS. Today's session will also be live streamed on ISA's Facebook page. I shall now invite Dr. Sevia to commence the discussion.
Thank you so much, Professor Tawqir Hussain Saab. Excellency, friends, colleagues, I'm delighted to see some old friends and some new faces as well. Welcome to this afternoon's seminar entitled Pakistan-Afghanistan Relations, Complicated History, Uncertain Future. I keep my comment short because you're here not to listen to me, but to listen to Professor Tawqir Saab. But just in terms of framing of what is the issue at hand that we are going to be looking at, and perhaps some of the ways in which we can frame our own thoughts as we hear from Professor Tawqir Saab. Now, Afghanistan and Pakistan share a rich and complex history. As many of us may be familiar with, the two countries are demarcated by a line that was drawn, a colonial line that was drawn in 1893, referred to as the Durand Line. One of the complications between the two countries is the very fact that this line was drawn by a colonial power, and there was very little buy-in subsequent to independence from Afghanistan. There are different views over the line. I'm sure we'll be hearing more about this issue, but just in terms of, to play a spoiler, Pakistan is quite concerned about this line being normalized and accepted on both sides. In Afghanistan, however, there has been a long-lasting resistance to the acceptance and the official recognition of this line. This has played out among different leaders from Afghanistan. Looking back to the first prime minister of, not the first prime minister, but the prime minister of Afghanistan when Pakistan got independence in 1947, Shah Mahmud Khan, all the way to Hamid Karzai, to the current Taliban. This line has been a point of contention on the part of Afghan leaders. Now, having started with the sort of borders, Pakistan, it's also important to know that despite this line, or perhaps because of the fluidity of this line, the two countries, Afghanistan and Pakistan, are also linked by numerous forms of mobilities that have continued to occur over the decades. And when I say mobilities, I refer to various types of mobilities, and these range from trade to people, to ideologies, to potential pipelines, to even militancy. And I won't go into too much about these issues, but think in terms of these two countries having a contested border, but intense amounts of mobilities going back and forth as well. And partly because of these mobilities, Pakistan emerged as one of the largest refugee hosting countries in the world, as millions of Afghan refugees streamed into Pakistan during the Mujahideen struggle with the Soviet Union and subsequently under the Taliban as well. And this has become a contentious issue as well today, because Pakistan is grappling with its own position with regards to this, and this is having ramifications geopolitically as well. Now, and I just mentioned the word geopolitics, so this strikes the very thought in my mind that when we look at this relationship, we cannot study in isolation of just two countries. We have to look at the regional and broader global geopolitical dimensions to this as well. In the 19th century, there was the great game between the British and the Russian Empire. Today, we are witnessing a new contestation over attempts to win influence in Afghanistan, be it India, be it China, be it Pakistan, be it Russia, and be it Iran. All of these countries are trying to gain some sort of leverage in Afghanistan for various reasons. They could be economic, they could be geopolitical, they could also be the thing that is the new buzzword, critical minerals now. So these are some of the issues that are leading to the new geopolitical rivalries that we're witnessing. But there are also internal dynamics that are very, very important to note, both in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And these internal dynamics are having great influence on how this relationship will be shaped out. Afghanistan has a number of ethnic fault lines. And there's also the return of the Taliban and how that is shaping out The Taliban is looking for legitimacy, and this is leading them to negotiate in specific ways with various countries. On its part, Pakistan has played an important role in shaping political developments in Afghanistan as well. Now, that's the historical bit. How do we, from here, look ahead at what's going to transpire and what sort of relationship these two countries, which are pivotal to the future of South Asia and Central Asia, I should add, will play. And for that, I turn to Tawqir Saab.
Thank you so much, Iqbal, and thanks all for coming. My special thanks to the High Commissioner, Her Excellency Abed Shafiq. And you have given such an accurate summary of my talk that I think there's no need for talk. I mean, honestly, we can finish the talk right here. Did you have access to my paper or what?
Unfortunately, no.
Honestly, as you will hear from me, so I mean, I have always had a very high admiration for him, but that admiration has gone up even higher. Honestly, it's a very, very good way of identifying the key issues, and those are the very issues which I'm going to talk about. And forgive me if the talk is a bit long, and because I thought it's a subject which is not very well known, except among maybe the Afghanistan specialists. So it's good to, so to speak, at length about it. And I speak here as an academic, not a publicist for Pakistan. For much of its history, Afghanistan has been a decentralized state. Afghanistan's power structure was not vertical, but horizontal, that dispersed power across the country among tribal chiefs, religious leaders, strongmen, and power brokers under the umbrella of a Pashtun-dominated, elite-led monarchy. But this organizing idea was inherently unstable, as Afghanistan had many serious fault lines: ethnic, tribal, regional, sectarian, and ideological. And not to speak of that, also a rural-urban divide, all of which created serious internal tensions. Not only these fault lines, but also another factor contributed to Afghanistan's internal tensions. That is the resistance to control and modernization. The attempts by Kabul in the past to control the periphery were resisted by the tribal chiefs and strongmen, and attempts to modernize were resisted by the religious leaders. A veritable complicated picture that made Afghanistan's domestic dynamic very conflict-prone. On top of that, Afghanistan was also exposed to, as Iqbal said, competitive geopolitics and contested regional politics. All this, on one hand, incited constant internal struggles for power, and on the other, tempted external powers, especially countries in the region, to intervene in Afghanistan to their advantage. Such a system did not allow for the emergence of a functional governance institutions of a modern state. Monarchy did provide a semblance of stability and modicum of development as long as Afghanistan's power distribution was not disturbed and foreign powers did not intervene. But with monarchy's overthrow in 1973, began the long process of unraveling of Afghanistan. Since then, the country has endured one of the most devastating conflicts of our times, involving two wars which produced no real winners. The United States was involved in both the wars, once to defeat the Soviet Union through jihadists, and second time to defeat the very jihadists it had created. And finally, it brought to power, with the Doha Accord of February 2020, the very Taliban whom it had overthrown 20 years before. As Dr. Henry Kissinger famously said, America has the knack of solving one crisis by creating another. As a result, the Taliban came to power twice without winning a war. Who were these Taliban? They were essentially a product of jihadist currents that had been flowing in Afghanistan and the region since the overthrow of monarchy, the wars that followed, and the global Islamic revival. The war economy of the two wars benefited drug mafia, criminal elements, corrupt politicians, and warlords, creating powerful stakeholders in Afghanistan's instability. As a reaction to all this emerged the Taliban, who set out to reform the society, but on the basis of a strictly puritanical religious ideology. As the noted author Hassan Abbas observed, an exhausted America, a corrupt Kabul government, and a demoralized Afghan forces all contributed to Taliban's return. Acclaimed American ambassador to Afghanistan, Ryan Crocker, observed the ultimate point of failure of our efforts was not insurgency, it was the weight of endemic corruption. In brief, the Taliban's rise, fall, and resurgence was the culmination of the decades of strife and conflict and bloody struggles for power in this unfortunate country. And above all, because of the failure of the ruling establishment in Kabul. The Afghans are a great people and a great nation, but they have been badly served by their ruling elite, who must share the bulk of responsibility for what has happened to this hapless country. Since their 2021 takeover, the Taliban have brought a reasonable amount of control over Afghanistan, but they have not fully consolidated their hold or stabilized the country. They face multiple challenges in the areas of economy, internal security, humanitarian situation, domestic politics, and foreign relations. 34 million people live below the poverty line. Almost half of them face food insecurity, security challenges. Security challenges emanate from National Resistance Front and ISKP, who are both anti-Taliban groups. And the space given by the Taliban to many jihadist, separatist, and terrorist organizations with whom Taliban have had the affinity over the decades has created ungoverned spaces which also compromise Afghanistan's security and stability. Not to mention their activities against countries in the region create tensions between these countries and Afghanistan, adding to its security challenges. Let me now come to Pakistan-Afghanistan relations. The relations were described by the former Trump negotiator for the Doha Accord, Zalmay Khalilzad, as the mother of all relations. Pakistan and Afghanistan share deep religious, cultural, and ethnic ties. Yet they have a complex and troubled relationship that involves shared but contentious history, overlapping identities, divided ethnicity, and bifurcated tribes straddled along a 2,600-kilometer long border. It's a relationship that is critical to the two countries' security, economic future, and political stability, but it has not been managed by either side. Many of Afghanistan's problems are a blowback from its irredentist claim against Pakistan and interference in its internal affairs. And many of Pakistan's problems originate from its own poor policy choices to meet the Afghanistan challenge. Pakistan has thus legitimate concern about Afghanistan's behavior, just as Afghanistan understandably blames Pakistan for some of its problems. Contrary to Pakistan's hopes that the Taliban would prove to be a friendly government, they have turned out to be very unfriendly. The relations have shown marked deterioration. Historically speaking, Pakistan-Afghanistan tensions are as old as Pakistan, as Afghanistan initially voted against its membership in the United Nations in 1947 on the basis of rejection of the Durand Line, and the relationship has never recovered since. Even when it was normal, it was uneasy. Analysts trivialize the complexity of the relationship by summing it up as an issue of Pakistan seeking a so-called strategic depth in Afghanistan, whatever it means. Strategic depth is a very dramatic label and has great resonance in the online world, but has no basis in reality. Anecdotally, a long time ago, a Pakistani military officer training at the National Defense University wrote an academic paper in which he spoke of Afghanistan's importance in the event of an India-Pakistan war, positing that Afghanistan could provide Pakistan the strategic depth that it lacked, which would allow a repositioning of forces and materials there. He was not defining Pakistan-Afghanistan relations with these two words. He was simply highlighting one of the several ways of Afghanistan's importance to Pakistan in his view. The so-called strategic depth was never accepted as or popularized as a strategic doctrine by the Pakistan military establishment. But the term has caught on, accumulating greater and greater significance over the decades, causing much misunderstanding about Pakistan's policy. But to the extent that Pakistan is concerned about securing the Afghanistan border through a friendly government in Kabul so as to avoid a two-front situation, the term signifies Pakistan's legitimate security concerns and may not be an unusual thing for a state to think about, whatever label you may want to put on it. The fact is, Pakistan-Afghanistan relationship goes well beyond the label of strategic depth. It's multidimensional, embracing not only security concerns, but also, for instance, domestic politics, regional rivalries, geopolitics, proxy wars, border dispute, economic ties, refugees, people-to-people contacts, and future prospects for regional connectivity, many of the things that Iqbal had pointed out. This has made it a big challenge for the two countries to have friendly, normal relations. It's a very large menu. Afghans accuse Pakistan of meddling in Afghan affairs. That has led to grievances and resentment. And Pakistan accuses Afghanistan of partnering with India against Pakistan and allowing anti-Pakistan militants to operate from Afghan territory. Now the Durand Line. If one were to point out one single issue at the heart of problems in Pakistan-Afghanistan relations, it's the Durand Line, the border between the two. While the international community in Pakistan recognized the Durand Line as the official border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, Afghanistan has consistently refused to do so since Pakistan's independence in 1947. Pakistan remains deeply wary of expansionist Afghan nationalism and views the Durand Line dispute as a fundamental threat to its territorial integrity. Yet, it's a difficult problem to resolve. This border cuts across a divided ethnicity long used to free flow of people and goods. and to border trade that has both benefited and harmed the two countries. The large Pashtun population living on both sides of the border has been an ally as well as an adversary for both Kabul and Islamabad. And these roles keep shifting, sometimes working for one side, sometimes working for another. The porous border had helped ease the movement of Mujahideen in 1980s, eventually leading to the freeing of Afghanistan from the Soviet occupation, and the same border allowed Taliban to move freely between Afghanistan and Pakistan, enabling them to launch a resistance against America's war and cause eventual collapse of the legitimate Kabul government. That government, though corrupt and incompetent, had made visible strides in human rights, education, healthcare, media, and women's empowerment. Since there has been, since then, there has been much erosion in these gains after Taliban's return. Afghans continue to leave, adding to Pakistan's huge refugee burden. And worst of all, TTP is operating out of Afghanistan's soil to commit acts of terrorism against Pakistan. Thus, the ghost of Afghanistan's vote against Pakistan in 1947 and its failed Pashtunistan movement keeps reappearing in different manifestations, undermining efforts at building trust and cooperation between the two countries to the disadvantage of both. What exactly is TTP? The Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan is a big problem between Pakistan and Afghanistan. The United Nations Security Council's Analytical Support and Sanctions Monitoring Committee has named several groups, including TTP and other Pakistani militant groups that had helped the Taliban's fight against the US and NATO forces. Now again, these groups enjoy the Taliban protection in Afghanistan as they did before 2001. The nexus among the Taliban and these brothers in faith and the Baloch Liberation Army is the source of biggest terrorist threat Pakistan faces. Tehreek-e-Taliban's rise mimicked that of the Afghan Taliban during the latter's campaign against America's Afghanistan war. It emerged from among Taliban's allies in Pakistan's tribal areas during that war. In December 2007, over 40 Pakistani militant groups formally united under the leadership of Baitullah Masood, a tribal leader from South Waziristan, to form the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. The organization's declared aims were twofold: to enforce Sharia law in the Pashtun areas and seek their independence, and secondly, support the Afghan Taliban in their fight against the US and NATO forces. Many of the TTP militants who fought against the American troops alongside the Afghan Taliban during that war were caught and put in Afghan prisons by the Kabul government during that war. Before its formal emergence, TTP's constituent groups had, through a campaign of violence and targeted assassination, killed around 200 rival tribal leaders. They were also suspected to be involved in December 2007 assassination of former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. These incidents were the beginning of a campaign of escalating violence, marking the TTP as a major threat to stability in Pakistan. By 2009, the TTP was estimated to have between 10,000 and 35,000 fighters. In the Operation Zarb-e-Azb, a massive Pakistani military offensive launched in 2014 after TTP's horrific attack on an army school, killing 140 children, thousands of militants were killed, captured, or driven into Afghanistan. By 2015, the TTP's presence in Pakistan was no more. But it did not disappear. It regrouped in Afghanistan with the help of Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Soon after taking over Kabul in 2021, the Afghan Taliban released hundreds of TTP prisoners from the Afghan jails. That strengthened their ranks, enabling them to resume their campaign against Pakistan from the Afghanistan soil much more violently and frequently than before. Currently, their number is estimated to be in the region of 4,000. It's made up of 24 groups with strong tribal affinities and interests. It has no political following in the worth the name in the KPK province, but it is capable enough to cause localized disturbances. Its main threat is not political, but campaign of terrorism. According to the Pakistan Institute for Peace Studies of Islamabad, the TTP and the terrorist groups affiliated with it carried out more than 150 attacks in 2022. Pakistan experienced 521 attacks on civilians and security forces in 2024, a 70% increase from the previous year, resulting in 2,500 casualties, including a suicide bombing that killed 5 Chinese engineers working on Dasuf Dam. There were also attacks by the Balochistan Liberation Army on Chinese projects in Pakistan, which was also suspected to be acting out of sanctuaries in Afghanistan. Overall, there have been 700 fatalities among the security establishment in 2024, a fact acknowledged recently by the US CENTCOM chief, General Corella, in a recent congressional testimony. In response, Pakistan decided to pursue a maximum pressure campaign in late 2023 to raise the cost for it for hosting TTP. It launched a series of cross-border airstrikes targeting alleged TTP hideouts in Afghanistan's border provinces in early 2024. The government indicated a willingness to continue such operations if cross-border attacks persisted. Apart from kinetic operations, the maximum pressure campaign included restrictions on transit trade and decision to expel nearly 1.3 million undocumented Afghans in the country, of which 800,000 have already been repatriated in 2023-2024. Other measures basically included a broad range of border control measures, including, among others, the continued building of a fence along the border by Pakistan that started in 2017. Diplomacy, economic pressure, military action, and threats of isolation, unfortunately, have not moved the Taliban to act against the TTP. The Taliban, in a game of deception they are adept in, and which has greatly helped them come this far, have been making disingenuous arguments and deflecting responsibility from themselves by advising Islamabad to negotiate with the TTP directly. Of course, these negotiations have no chance of success as long as TTP enjoys safe havens in Afghanistan. And Taliban know it from their own experience that such groups are not interested in negotiations. Kabul's lack of action against the TTP has many reasons. There are ideological links between the Taliban and the TTP, and then the Taliban lack both the political will and capacity to act against the TTP. At its core, the reason for lack of action is the regime's priority for survival. Fundamentally, what was good for the regime's survival was preferable by at any time to improved relations with Pakistan. Talking of the survival, ISKP poses the biggest threat to Afghanistan's domestic security and Taliban forces. It has become the most active and deadly terrorist groups in Afghanistan since Taliban's return to power in 2021, responsible for hundreds of attacks on civilians, religious minorities, and Taliban targets. The Taliban also face some threat posed by the National Resistance Front, but as yet it remains insignificant. The Taliban are worried not only about threats from ISKP, but also from fissures within their own ranks that may cause disunity. And the two worries are connected. Here is how. The Taliban has two principal factions. The Quetta Shura, who are the inheritors of Mullah Umar's Taliban movement, and the Haqqani group. Their differences are regional, tribal, and ideological that find their focus on the conflicts about sharing of power. The Quetta Shura itself is factionalized between the hardliners and the moderates. Moderates who are made up of the pragmatic and internationalist elements like Mullah Brother are in favor of inclusive government and relations with the West. Amir Akhundzada feels that the factionalized Taliban can only be united behind a radical vision which is shared by himself and the majority of the movement. He knows that the rank and file is very radical ideologically and is against an inclusive government, women's employment, and girls' education. They want a government exclusively run by the Taliban based on Sharia law, even if that means defiance of the West. And that is the only reason for that is not the only reason for the Taliban's radical policies. There is a concern that less radical policies or military action against TTP will create dissidents who might join ISKP. The Taliban remember that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda defectors were responsible for forming the ISKP in 2015, giving preeminence to the radical ideology of the majority hardliners allows the Emir to kill two birds with one stone. First, to achieve unity with the help of rank and file, and second, to realize his own leadership ambitions. So there is no way for him to take action against the TTP. A noted Afghan writer, Arvind Rahi, in an article in the National Interest, had another perspective to offer. And I quote, Afghanistan has offered protection to any Pashtuns fleeing Pashtun majority areas of the subcontinent. India under the British rule and Pakistan since 1947. In addition to historical baggage, there are also ideological links between the Taliban and TTP. Like the Taliban themselves, the TTP regards the Taliban leader Hibatullah Akhundzada as its leader. No Taliban leader would ever hand over their followers and supporters who fought shoulder to shoulder with their fighters to another country. The TTP's claim that it wants to enforce Sharia in the tribal areas also resonates with the Taliban leaders who claim to have fought and to enforce Sharia. Finally, as about the TTP benefit from the Taliban benefit from the TTP's presence in Afghanistan. They treat them and various militant groups operating from Afghanistan's soil as allies to meet potential external aggression. The Taliban have hinted that much, that if they come under attack, they will unleash all these militant elements. They have made no secret about that. These groups are also being used by Taliban to leverage, as a leverage to uh, obtain concessions like recognition, commercial ties from Central Asian countries, China and Russia. The TTP and Baloch insurgents are the Taliban's leverage against Pakistan over issues like border, refugees, and trade. Talking of trade, trade between Pakistan and Afghanistan is performing below its potential. It too has been complicated by the TTP issue. Pakistan is Afghanistan's largest trading partner, an important trade transit route for international trade. For the landlocked Afghanistan, the border with Pakistan is vital not only for transit trade, but also for trade with Pakistan, as well as local trade along the border. Pakistan, to its credit, has continued to provide international transit access to Afghanistan, even though it has caused economic costs because of the misuse of the transit system. Goods destined for Afghanistan have often either remained in Pakistan without paying proper customs duty or re-entered Pakistan through smuggling, largely organized by Afghan traders. Smuggled goods not only cause revenue losses of around $2 to $3 billion annually, but also damage Pakistan's economy. Pakistan therefore had no choice but to impose stricter border control measures and import restrictions. The trade between the two countries declined significantly, dropping by 59% in the fiscal year 2023-2024 due to Pakistan's over-applied anti-smuggling measures. But the first 9 months of 2024 and 25 have registered an increase of about 68% over the corresponding period last year. The border control measures were also aimed at preventing narcotics trafficking as well as arms and illegal currency movements. The measures included the abolition of Tazkira system that had allowed the nationals to travel between the two countries. And Pakistan, in place of that, introduced the passport system. This was necessary because the porous Durand line has been impacted by nearly half a century of strife and conflict in Afghanistan and free movement of people and organized groups that has resulted in the virtual decimation of traditional control and authority by tribal leaders and their replacement by leaders of militant networks and criminal elements. These groups challenge the rule of law already weakened by poor law enforcement and corruption on both sides. All this led to an influx of firearms, drugs, and other illicit goods. Pakistan is within its rights to bring some degree of control over all this, but the Taliban, for their own reasons, are resisting it. The Taliban do not want any change along the Pakistan-Afghanistan frontier that had virtually become an open border due to decades of Taliban infusion. The status quo helps the economic interchange in the border areas and helps the Taliban retain their influence while denying the Durand line as the international border. So Taliban have a purpose in letting this border continue as it was. It's true, if the border is closed, it affects trade flows and seasonal migrations, causing economic hardships and limiting social interaction among people living in the area, comprising about 17 to 18 tribes. But the onus on the Taliban to prevent this unfortunate situation. They should not expect Pakistan to continue to bear economic loss, face terrorist attacks, and accept refugees that are adding to the enormous burden of refugees Pakistan is already hosting. Pakistan wants a normal border with passport control and trade restrictions, but the Taliban are resisting it. There are also a deliberate effort by the Taliban to retaliate by diverting trade away from Pakistan. For example, following Pakistan's decision back in 2023 to evict undocumented Afghans, Mullah Brother, Deputy Prime Minister for Economic Development, led a large delegation to Tehran, signing many agreements that would shift Afghanistan's balance of trade towards Iran away from Pakistan. Both Iran and India have a shared interest in advancing access to Central Asia by sidestepping Pakistan, for which opportunity has been enhanced by increasing tensions in the Pakistan-Afghanistan relations. This also compounds further Pakistan-Afghanistan relations. What are the other issues between Afghanistan and Pakistan? Other issues between the two countries include each country's relationship, especially that of Afghanistan, with major powers like China, the US, and Russia, not to mention India and Iran. China's interest in Afghanistan is all-embracing, covering economic and security cooperation and geopolitics. China is especially interested in the mining sector, of which Afghanistan offers a great prospect, including for rare earth minerals. The China-Afghan Mining Processing and Trading Company has planned joint investment in this sector. Besides, in 2023, China signed a 25-year, $540 million contract to extract oil from the Amu Darya Basin. But there is a remarkable lack of detail about the mining and oil exploration projects, most probably because nothing much is happening on the ground. The long-term potential for Afghanistan-China economic cooperation is large, but its realization is limited due to Afghanistan's potential political instability, economic uncertainty, lack of infrastructure, poor banking and financial system, and weakness of the institutional governance. China's immediate interest in Afghanistan is therefore not economic, but security threats from extremist groups that could destabilize China's Xinjiang region. And that is where the two countries' cooperation, like counterterrorism support, intelligence sharing, and joint security operations along China-Afghanistan border is concentrated. Security is an important prerequisite to enable China's broader economic regional objectives that include Afghanistan's expected integration into the BRI. Before getting involved in the long-term economic cooperation with Afghanistan, China would perhaps prefer Afghanistan to first consolidate its position domestically and bring itself to a position where it can attract foreign investment for its basic economic development and show some progress in the prospect of recognition abroad. Without these objectives, without these advances, the prospects for greater bilateral China-Afghanistan and regional cooperation would remain uncertain. That is why China's engagement with the Taliban remains cautious for now, focusing on core issues like counterterrorism, humanitarian aid, and modest and cautious attempts at regional connectivity, including a proposed project between Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Uzbekistan to construct a 573-kilometer railway line from Mazar-e-Sharif to Peshawar, for which an agreement was signed in 2024. As for India, India and the Taliban have had multiple high-level diplomatic meetings. Over the last 2 decades, India has invested heavily in the Afghan society in healthcare, education, and infrastructure projects. India claims it has spent in these 2 decades almost $3 billion. India has just ended a visa freeze that began with the return of Taliban rule. A new visa system has been announced, allowing the visit of Afghan students, businessmen, and medical tourists. India has also continued to offer 1,000 scholarships for online undergraduate and postgraduate studies. The reasons for India's involvement in Afghanistan are manifold. India's other concern is the presence of some jihadist elements in Afghanistan. India is also using its relations with Afghanistan as a leverage against Pakistan, just as Taliban are using their relations with India for the same purpose. Both of India and Afghanistan have an interest in sidestepping Pakistan and developing their trade through Iran by using Chabahar. India's outreach to Taliban is thus as much geopolitical as economic and security related. India may have its legitimate interests in Afghanistan, but Pakistan has its own legitimate concerns focusing on India's alleged support to anti-Pakistan outfits present on Afghan soil like TTP and BLA. As for the US, it's principally interested in Afghanistan because of the possible terrorist threats from groups operating on the Afghan soil. There is likely a geopolitical interest in not letting Afghanistan slide into the Chinese and Russian sphere of influence. The US also needs Afghanistan's cooperation in repatriating 9,000 Afghans living in the US under the temporary protected status, and repatriation to the US of the Afghans left behind who cooperated with the Americans in the Afghanistan war, and also for the release of hostages. Almost, I think, 110,000 Afghans are waiting in Afghanistan to be repatriated. About 90,000 are waiting in third countries. And I think 180,000 or something like that are already in the United States. But Afghanistan does not want any deep or long-term engagement with Taliban. The strong counterterrorism interest it has in the region can perhaps be addressed with over-the-horizon arrangements with Pakistan or Central Asian countries. But as far as Taliban are concerned, they are not averse to direct counterterrorism arrangements with Washington in the hope it might lead to recognition. The transactional President Trump may agree to this cooperation, but may not give much in return by way of restoration of some aid programs. There will certainly be no promise for recognition or for the release of withheld assets or lifting of sanctions. Not only because President Trump may demand a higher price, but also because domestic public opinion remains unfavorable for the Taliban due to its human rights record, especially the treatment of women, although if the price is right, Trump may not care much about human rights situation. Historically, Afghanistan has shrewdly exploited other countries' interests in the country, whether, as Iqbal mentioned, for great game, Cold War, or for regional rivalries and competition by playing off one power against the other. The strategy had ensured its security and financial viability, but the Soviet invasion and the wars that followed have created a very different Afghanistan. It's no longer seen as a potential buffer, but a troubled country. Though it's ruled by a regime lacking legitimacy at home and recognition abroad, the isolation of this regime is not an option. in view of the several factors that go well beyond geopolitics, regional rivalries, and conflicts. These factors include terrorist threats, serious humanitarian concerns, human rights issues, especially women's rights and girls' education, concerns about narcotics and outflow of refugees. Taliban know it and are exploiting it to their advantage with admittedly good diplomacy. They are supporting whoever gives them the most benefits. Leaving aside Pakistan, which is a special case for them, the Taliban are open to relations with all powers to enhance their engagement and leverage it with other countries, even though in the process, Afghanistan may yet again become an arena for regional rivalries and geopolitical competition like in the historical past. Now I come to the conclusion, and my apologies for this longish presentation. Afghanistan is part of a complex of challenges that affected the regional security, Pakistan's own economic future, and that of the region, and above all, Pakistan's internal security. And as far as Afghanistan is concerned, its relations with Pakistan are the most important factor for its stabilization. After what they have gone through in the past half a century with shared experience of wars and rise of extremism, the problems of both Pakistan and Afghanistan are now tied to each other's policies and domestic conditions. Right now, both sides are trying to solve their internal problems at the expense of relations with each other. This has to change. Instead of hoping for a friendly government in Kabul, it would be better for Pakistan to look for a stable Afghanistan that should not be unfriendly. Pakistan cannot become a geo-economic hub without a stable Afghanistan, having a peaceful and functional relations with Afghanistan. As the only game in town, the Taliban are not the best, but the only hope for stability of Afghanistan. With so many non-state actors present in the country, you need a government in control. If it loses control, there will be infighting and competition for ungoverned spaces by transnational terrorists and extremists, radiating threat to the regional and global security and sending out floods of refugees, like some African countries. Pakistan has to make sure its maximum pressure campaign against Afghanistan is applied very judiciously. It motivates the Taliban to act, but not destabilize them. The reality is, and Pakistan should recognize that Taliban are not going to use force against TTP on Pakistan's behalf, nor would they like Pakistan to attack TTP in Afghanistan. It will make their already precarious security situation worse. Pakistan, therefore, may have no choice but to use force against PTT, but do so within its own borders, if possible. In any case, TTP is more than a military challenge. Military action will not work. Military action alone will not work. Pakistan would be well advised to keep in mind non-kinetic counterterrorism measures, especially those recommended by the UN, like increasing socio-economic opportunities, reducing political marginalization, and improving governance and neutralizing social networks that propagate violent extremism. Tackling TTP is a long haul, which would require a regular engagement with the Afghan Taliban. Political ownership of the TTP as a challenge within KPK province and addressing the grievances of ex-Fatah area. But the Taliban should play their part too. In the ultimate analysis, Taliban will have to sacrifice their ties with the TTP. There's no other way. They need to talk to the TTP mainly to convince them that peace in the region is indispensable for Afghanistan's stability and progress. And peace will not come without peaceful relations with Pakistan. And that will depend on TTP's disbanding itself. That's a decision Taliban have to make. The Chinese may also be telling Kabul that if they want Beijing's help, they will have to stop the TTP. It's affecting CPEC's projects in Pakistan that have come under attack by TTP. Basically, the Chinese are trying to raise the stake over the TTP, which Pakistan by itself could not do. Perhaps that is what happened during the recent tripartite meeting of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and China in Beijing. Pakistan, Afghanistan, China tripartite meeting in Beijing may bode well for the Pakistan-Afghanistan relations. It was decided that Pakistan will upgrade its relations with Afghanistan to the ambassador's level, and China also decided to formally extend CPEC to Afghanistan and invest in Pakistan-Afghanistan-Uzbekistan railway line. These are tangible achievements. However, the real test would be what decision Taliban take about the TTP. For Pakistan, the short-term expectation from the decision to integrate Afghanistan into the CPEC would be to ensure safety of CPEC projects in Pakistan that have been coming under attack from TTP and Baloch insurgents. And Pakistan's ultimate hope would be that the integration of Afghanistan into CPEC would lead to economic interdependence between Pakistan and Afghanistan, recognition of the Durand Line by the Taliban, and Pakistan's access to Central Asian markets. If CPEC indeed comes to Afghanistan, which will take time, that will increase China's influence on Afghanistan, which can be leveraged to make Kabul make real hard choices. CPEC's success in Afghanistan will involve economic cooperation with Pakistan. If ordinary people on both sides benefit from economic cooperation, let's say from an expanded transit trade agreement and regional infrastructure projects like CASA 1000 and the TAPI pipeline and the railway network, it can restore trust and confidence among the people, and that might help to resolve the differences. The two countries also need to cooperate in counterterrorism. The Taliban have to realize that Pakistan's attempts at border management can be to their favor also, to their interest also. They need to have intelligence sharing. Just as TTP is operating on Afghanistan soil, the ISKP is using Pakistani soil besides using Afghanistan soil. Al-Qaeda is also another common enemy that requires cooperation between the two countries. But hard political decisions must precede their security and economic cooperation, which would not happen if Pakistan and Afghanistan do not set aside their differences. Their present policies have stuck them in differences over issues that are either intractable, like the Durand Line, or have no short-term solution, like the refugees, or are more domestic than external, like the TTP. They should not become obstacles for cooperation. I think Pakistan is strong, stable, and economically prosperous enough to take the risk for peace. The final thought, Taliban are the best chance for stability, as the resistance to it has no meaningful support. And if they fall, there will be conflicts in Afghanistan, and the transition will not be peaceful, as Afghans have not shown any prospects of peaceful settlement of disputes. As an acclaimed Afghanistan expert, Marvin Weinbaum, wrote in a book, From Emirate to Emirate, 20 Years, America's 20 Years War, he said, over the period from 1975 through present, Afghans have been engaged in six identifiable civil wars, and in none of them they have been able to achieve political compromise. In every case, the outcome was determined by one side eventually winning and the other losing. Surely neither Taliban nor Pakistan want to see this happen again. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tawqir Hussain Saib, for that rich, detailed, and thought-provoking discussion, and which you've shared a number of details, a number of scenarios, a number of prognoses as well. We have about 12 to 15 minutes for questions, so I'm going to forgo my moderator's right to ask the first question and just go to the floor. Could I request you keep your question brief? Just introduce yourself, and then I'll take about 2 or 3 questions at a time. If that's okay.
I think
Or would you prefer a single question?
a single question I generally prefer, yeah.
So the floor is open. Yes, please. Yes. There's a mic because it's a live, so the people on
Okay,
YouTube
I'm
can hear.
Soundray Sukumar, well, originally from India. Well, just I want to ask, how long is this kind of a strained relations been between the Pakistanis and the Afghanis? I mean, like, how far back does it go? Is it from the inceptions of these countries, or were they friendly countries and then suddenly the politics and the administration, everything went out of control? Strains, when did
It has been from the very beginning, and I think, as Iqbal had also pointed out, that it began essentially with Afghanistan's irredentist claim against the parts of Pakistan based on the presence of Pashtuns who are also in Afghanistan. And they voted against Pakistan's admission in the United Nations in 1947 initially. Later on, they reversed their decision. And after that, they have been, on one pretext or the other, been hostile to Pakistan. Partly because of it's a question of Durand Line, partly because they got the sort of the ambition for territorial expansion, always have a good resonance in domestically. They wanted to sort of please their domestic population. Partly to please India, they came to have good relations with India, and India also used them against Pakistan. And partly also because of the Cold War, Soviet Union was on one side and Pakistan's had good relations with America. So combination of factors.
Is it a post-British?
Yeah. I'm talking
Post-British.
after,
Before
yeah,
that,
after 1947.
1947. Before
Yeah.
that, there was quite a good relationship between these two ethnic groups. I mean, Pakistanis and
Well, we are talking of a different part of history. Before that, with the British India and Afghanistan, and there was a relative sort of stability on the Afghanistan side, relative stability on the this side. But as I said, the relationship became victim of many things, essentially because of Afghanistan's expansionist ambitions, its resonance of these territorial ambitions within for the domestic population, and it's being a factor of Afghanistan's relations with India, a factor of Afghanistan's relation with Soviet Union, whole lot of things. And then there's about supporting sort of Pakistani dissident elements within the Pashtuns. So sometimes the embassies and consulates will be, Pakistani embassies will be attacked. They would be sort of, I mean, this thing has been going on and for a long time.
That was a brilliant way to sum up such a long, complex series of events. Thank you. Imran. Yeah.
Hello, Professor. I'm Imran. I've obviously met. I wanted to, you mentioned recent developments in May concerning China's mediation involvement, getting Afghanistan and Pakistan to talk together. I was curious to know, what do you think sort of motivated that, and where do you think that was it something that Pakistan reached China for? I mean, my question is a bit speculative. Also, and do you see this kind of thaw in kind of the diplomacy, do you see it something that could potentially last?
Last sentence I didn't follow, but
The future of this, the potential.
Pakistan, Afghanistan, and China have a trilateral forum. Okay, they meet from time to time to discuss their mutual problems. This was not part of that format, because under that format, their next meeting was supposed to take place later in the year. But my guess is what may have happened was the increasing attacks by the TTP on CPEC projects, okay? And so TTP's terrorist attacks against Pakistan were thus no longer just a Pakistan-Afghanistan problem, but they were becoming, in a way, Afghanistan-China problem also, because the CPEC is the Chinese. And China perhaps realized that Pakistan had done its very best. It had a sort of adopted soft approach. It had adopted a hard approach. Nothing was working. And Afghanistan was not listening to Pakistan. And perhaps it needed an extra leverage. And that leverage could only be provided by China. And the Taliban are clever, because I think that was they allowed the TTP attacks against the CPEC for a reason, because they wanted to use those attacks not only against Pakistan but against China also, in a way to they were using leverage against China too, because they're doing whatever they can to. So China had to come into the picture to tell them, this is my view, I'm not privy to what their discussions, that look, if you want our help, whether it's for mining, or whether it's for oil exploration, whether it's for humanitarian aid, or it is for cooperation and counterterrorism, you have to listen to us. And this way, if our interests are being harmed in Pakistan, we are not going to go ahead in cooperation with you, because if there's instability in Pakistan, that affects Afghanistan, if stability also, and that affects China's interests. So I think it was essentially some partly arm twisting by China, and partly throwing in an incentive of offering the Afghanistan's integration into CPEC. They had been talking about it for a long time. The first offer was made in 2019, but at that time it was just an expression of interest of expanding CPEC into Afghanistan. Nothing much happened. Then 2019, they kind of reiterated their commitment to bring Afghanistan into it, but nothing much happened. And this time, they went a little far by formally inviting Afghanistan to become. So hope was that a combination of incentive as well as some arm twisting will motivate Afghanistan. And plus they did some, I would not say arm twisting, but some persuasion to Pakistan also, that you upgrade your relationship with them. So Pakistan decided to upgrade its relation with them. And again, as I said, I was not privy to the discussion, but my feeling is that they may have advised Pakistan as to what would be the best way to handle the relationship.
Thank you so much.
Going from here, we don't know. I mean, but so far, the statements coming out from Afghanistan and Pakistan so far show that there was some progress.
Thank you.
I'm going to try and squeeze in two more questions. Sandeep?
Thank you, Professor. That was a very comprehensive presentation. I'm surprised by the depth of differences between Taliban and Pakistan over TTP. And I was wondering if you could talk about did Pakistan anticipate that this problem will emerge when Taliban was coming into power a few years ago? Because my limited understanding is that Pakistan's approach to Taliban's return to power was complicated. On one hand, it was a US ally against Taliban, but there was sections of Pakistan which were also supporting Taliban's return, right? Or welcome Taliban's return. Did that section or that part of establishment anticipate this problem, and what was their approach of thinking about that this TTP problem might emerge once Taliban returns to power? And if the chair would permit me a little, one more question, which is, I was just thinking about the conceptual value of framing Durand Line problem as a border dispute between two states, which historically we think of a territory being contested by two states. They both get into military confrontation about it. And usually the solution is basically that the two states sit down, talk, and figure out a common line. Ideally, that would be the solution. Here, the problem, because on Afghanistan side, the state capacity is so minimal, does it make sense to think about it conceptually as a border dispute? Or perhaps to use a more colonial idea, something like frontier, right? Where Pakistan has to think about it not in terms of another equal state to deal with, but more of a frontier situation that it has to manage in some other way. Conceptually, what do you think makes sense more?
Complicated question. I mean, let me address your first question. I think there was some degree of miscalculation or overconfidence by Pakistan about its relationship with Taliban. I mean, there are many possible ways of why it happened. I don't want to go into details. We don't have much time. But I would briefly summarize what I was saying, that Pakistan overestimated Taliban's friendship for them, or Taliban's friendliness for them after coming to power. Taliban were friendly to Pakistan as a resistance, but Pakistan did not quite anticipate that as a government, its obligations, its priorities, and its concerns will be different. Resistance is one thing, as a government is a different thing. So I would personally describe it as some degree of failure of Pakistan that overestimated. Then, as far as TTP is concerned, let's say while Pakistan overestimated relationship with Taliban, it underestimated the TTP and underestimated the connection between TTP and Taliban. So there are many things. Now, some of the things could have been anticipated and some could not have been. And I would blame Pakistan's failure only with those things which could have been anticipated, and about people were writing. I wrote in my articles before 2021 what was going on. So these were the things that could have been anticipated. It was a policy failure. But things could not have been anticipated are also very relevant because they're difficult. Nothing about it. Your second question is too maybe you should address it to Akbar sometime, because honestly, where it comes to finding explanations of things in terms of colonialism, I have a problem, because then it becomes a very, very different kind of discussion. But part of your question is very valid, and Iqbal also addressed that it's not just border. You have the divided ethnicity, you have the divided tribes, you have a very unique situation where the porous border sort of sometimes help one side, sometimes help the other side, and some of it have. So best thing is, because of the intractability of the problem, it's better to put it on the back burner. And it can be put on the back burner. What you need is a border management. Right now, the recognition issue is not standing in the bit. Recognition is a long-term issue, but border management is an immediate issue. And I think on that, Pakistan is right. And Taliban have to do something. They cannot just have the best of both worlds. I mean, act as a resistance, as if it was the same time as before, going back and forth, having their constituency in Pakistan, which you have mentioned, and then trying to use that also as a leverage against Pakistan. as if they can they don't need Pakistan, as if they're treating Pakistan as if there are two Pakistan, one Pakistan that supports them and one Pakistan that opposes them. There is only one Pakistan, and they're both right now are united against Taliban's support for the TTP.
Actually, before I come, can I just, because there are a number of people who are watching us on Facebook as well, on live telecast. I mean, just could you expand a little bit about the border management techniques that Pakistan is using to manage the border that they are attempting to put into place?
I think what had been going on, because these people were going back and forth without any proper ID requirements. So Pakistan has imposed a passport that you need to have a passport on that. Pakistan is also trying to build defense, which they started building in 2017, which Taliban have been doing their best to demolish from time to time. So Pakistan has also been taken strict military measures against smuggling, for example. These are some of the things that broadly come to mind, but we are lucky to have High Commissioner here if she wants to add anything to it.
Very quickly, so all you've already mentioned, I think we have also put in place a biometric verification system for border crossing also. So it's a biometric verification system also, in addition to all what Professor Tawqir has mentioned.
Ivan?
Well, first, thank you so much for a very comprehensive and kind of deep discussion. One comment and one question. My comment is very interestingly, you mentioned China, and there have been some suggestions that China is actually reaching out to Baloch separatists. And I have even read claims that they might be interested in reaching out to the TTP. So it's very interesting whether, I mean, because there is a certain kind of Chinese anxiety about going to Afghanistan to managing the TTP. So it's interesting whether they will be trying to kind of, well, manage the problem on the ground on the China-Pakistan economic corridor by directly kind of dealing with the TTP. It's a big question. I've seen it as a suggestion. I don't know what will come out. But my question is the following. I'm sure that within the Pakistani establishment, there is a debate about Afghanistan, because obviously it's a very major issue, and obviously things didn't go as I think many people expected after 2021. So my question is, what's the debate within the within the Pakistani establishment about Afghanistan? Because it doesn't seem that any policy clearly works. So are there different options? Are there different schools of thought what to do? Because I'm sure that there is a big debate. I'm pretty sure about this.
You know, on these issues, such as issue like that, there's always a debate in government circles, always. I don't know exactly who's saying what, but from the appearances, it seems that with the, I mean, that since late 2023, maybe with the coming of new army chief, there has been a tough line against Afghanistan. Initially it started with a tough line on the currency smuggling, because Pakistan's economic was facing very serious economic issues at that time. So maybe that is one that motivated the government to act. And I think from the action against currency smuggling emerged other possible ways. When they started imposing that control, they realized that no, it's much more serious, and there are many other ways in which we are having issues and problems, and especially when the terrorism issue became more acute. Now, it has had some success, but full success is still eluding Pakistan. So that's why there are suggestions, some of which I have echoed also, that maybe it's perhaps better to sort of slow down the process of repatriation of refugees, for example. And also on the issue of TTP, you have to take action both within your own border, sort of conciliate the areas where TTP may find its constituency, and also adopt different tactics in dealing with Taliban. So we will see. I think something must have happened in this tripartite meeting to change the strategy. And whether it is or not, we will see in the coming days. But the short answer to your question is, I'm sure there was a debate, and people were saying, well, this soft methods have not worked, let's go for hard. And they discovered that even hard methods have their shortcomings. So I think that's what has happened.
Thank you. On that note, I have to call an end to today's discussion, but we are free to chat after this as well, if Professor Tawqir Hussain is willing. Professor Tawqir Hussain is a part of the ISAS family, and it's always such a pleasure to welcome him back. And whenever he comes to ISAS, he never fails to disappoint with his insightful knowledge, but also his generosity in sharing his experiences as a diplomat, as an academic, and a policymaker. So on behalf of ISAS and everybody present here, I thank you, Professor Saab, for joining us today. So please join me.
Thank you so much. And ISAS has been a great institution for my own learning. And before I conclude my association with ISAS, I must compliment it for maintaining a very high degree of intellectual integrity and autonomy. And believe me, I am not saying this to praise Iqbal and the Institute. I have been speaking here whenever I come. There has been no editorial policy, believe me. And I'm telling you the truth. I have said whatever I wanted to say. Nobody influenced me and nobody criticized me afterwards. Thank you.
And in fact, it's been very appreciated what you say. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Dr. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.